Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Loving the Season You're In. So where we wanted to take this conversation was really just around the idea of resentment busting, resentment busting tips, resentment busting thought processes, underlying beliefs, and really working on how to free yourself into loving where you're at right now without carrying the burden that resentment places on all of us. So what I love about this was your topic suggestion, Bridgie, and then you have just squirreled away and sent me all of these notes. You're like these things. And while you were doing that, I'm in the car going, no, I think it's this and it's this, which I just love when we do that.
Yes.
What that means is we covered this podcast with two different viewpoints on exactly the same topic, which is, I think, such the value in what Nourishing the Mother offers, right?
Yeah. So
let's go
I'm
through.
super curious on what's on your list.
So let's go through your list.
Sure.
And then let's look at mine, and then let's see where we end up, because I actually think this will be a super potent conversation. So strap in if you are on the resentment train, which I'd like to say, I don't know someone who is not.
Exactly. Yeah. Because resentment is part of being human, right? Like it's part of like having to confront ourselves as we grow as well, and ourselves when we outgrow up the different identities that we've like been latching onto. So I think making friends with it is first of all a key part of loving the season you're in.
Great.
I'll kick off with my first point, which was fantasies versus realities.
Okay, let's just break this down first, though, because we could have some new listeners here who are like, what do you mean by fantasies? Like, are we talking sexual fantasies here? And the answer is no, not the language that we're talking about in here. So do you want to break that down for us?
Yeah, so a fantasy is like a one-sided view of life, of yourself, of parenting. It tends to be filled with, experiences that might be all good, or, all this particular amazingness, or it's only going to be this, or when I can have that, then I'll be free of this other thing. And so it is, positive thinking, positive vibes. Like it's an unsustainable way of living, and we use it as a way to get us out of, reality that we're living in, which is fun to play with. But when we start to become hooked on a way of thinking that says, my motherhood or my life will be better when, or if my child did this, then I could be okay, we start to have a really disembodied experience of mothering and of ourselves, which makes it really difficult to be here now. Yeah. So a classic fantasy can be, when I become a mother, I'm going to have all of these, deeply loving feelings all of the time, and I'm going to feel connected to my child and myself, and it's going to be this life I've been yearning for and waiting for, and the freedom I'm looking for from a job I don't love. Like, you can see how you start to build it up, right? To build it up as this impossible reality. And what happens when you build up an impossible reality is that you come crashing down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what can be an experience for some women of postnatal depression, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't realize the truth of what this experience of mothering or this season of mothering was going to bring us. And so we come crashing into it.
And even when we're there, what we're doing unconsciously is comparing our reality to this made up fantasy, and therefore continuously reaffirming how shit what we have is.
Because we only tend to understand something by its opposite. And so if the opposite we've created is, you know, my child will sleep through the night, my partner will be always supportive, there'll be people around me who really believe exactly the same values that I believe and want to help me. Like, you can see how these constructs in our mind can very quickly be hampered by the reality that, well, biologically babies often don't sleep a lot. The people around you are not designed to support your values all of the time. Your partner will see parenting and mothering different to you, and that may be a source of conflict. And so the more fantasy-driven we are, often the more of a nightmare we're going to experience as an attempt for our psyche and the universe around us to balance us out. Because if we don't do that balancing ourselves, the outer world has to do that for us. And sometimes that can feel deeply uncomfortable and humbling.
Shattering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was one of the ways. And we can, you know, our fantasies will either be like, we'll consciously break them as we become more aware, or we'll be forced to break them, and it will happen through that kind of shattering process.
Yeah. Yep. So your next point was, what's here for my inner child to confront and release? When it comes to loving the season you're in and resenting where you're at, what's here for my inner child to confront and release?
And I put this one here because at every age and stage of our children and us as parents, we're going to meet aspects of ourselves at the same age. And so that's why we can feel sometimes completely sideswiped by our child's particular behaviour or a big sleep challenge if we've got a newborn, because all of a sudden we are brought into our own trauma, our own places of shutdown, our own key places of emotional wounding or patterns that were set in place, perhaps of shame or of not speaking up. And so we're offered an opportunity to kind of see, okay, is it the adult driving the bus here in terms of our responses, or is it my inner child? And a way to see if it's your inner child is to also look at how the dynamic is with your parenting partner in response to what the child in front of you is doing. Because if you're going into overprotection with the child, if you are, you know, almost irrationally emotional about what might be going on, then chances are there's something playing out in the child's behavior that's for you, that's you getting a chance to look again at what's unhealed for you. Because our children are designed to hit that for us because they want us to grow. They're designed to express what we've repressed.
Yeah.
So that question of, you know, what's here for my inner child allows us to explore what might be unconscious but that's showing up, and then take back some control.
I would also add into that particularly when it's our children that are expressing what we're repressing or who are offering the perfect setup for us to tap into that unconscious wound or reaction, that we can end up resenting our child.
Yeah.
Or resenting our partner for what we say is because of them and they're so or they're not or whatever. But actually what we're not enjoying is the experience of the reflection of self that comes up in that moment. And we can get quite resentful of the fact that that's being thrown in our face in a way.
Yeah, and I love that point that you're laboring here, because also what can come with that is shame attached to our resentment of our child, because the conscious kind of like executive center part of our brain goes, but you shouldn't feel like that about a child. Yeah. But yet you do, because there's a part of you that wants you to grow into it and beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. That's why I thought it was just worth pinning, because it is one of those shamey emotions that mothers rarely have a conversation about, and yet which I think in different seasons is quite normal and functional.
And like, I mean, there's key seasons for it. There's, you know, there's the whining toddler, or there's the precocious tween, or the, you know, the teen who talks back, or there's particular characterizations of children that have stored within them what we still have
unresolved feelings about.
Unresolved feeling, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Your next point was getting on the same team with your partner.
Yeah. So this, I think, is really key for you to feel good in your family values, in being on the path of the same kind of vision for what you want for your family. Not necessarily that you both see getting there the same way, or that you expect you to both perceive things the same way, but that you both see the same desired kind of outcome.
Yes.
And this will require you to meet your inner child a little, which might be uncomfortable, and to surrender the projections that you may have onto them of how they should parent, what they should value, and how you think that they might have to take a back seat to you because you know better. Because also many mothers, you know, we're most self-righteous in our parenting because we put so much value there. But in doing that, we can sometimes emasculate our partner, we can crowd them out, they can feel less needed, which can then impact your intimacy. And so getting on the same team, I see as giving you more spaciousness, because then if you're on the same team and you're both checking in with each other on the dynamics that are at play, on where each child's at, on what each child needs, then you know that when you step back and take care of yourself or your other interests, that you don't always constantly have like one foot in, oh gosh, is he doing it okay? Or, oh gosh, are they going to be okay? You can actually be you and be in alignment with what you're pursuing, whether that's a parenting or something else.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful advice, particularly for someone who's like, I can't take my foot off that brake or that accelerator. Foot
off that pedal, yeah.
Next one is you don't have to do it all, busting the perfect mother myth.
So the perfect mother myth is this, you know, sociologically perpetuated construct that says, you know, you have perfectly behaved children, and then that the good child is a reflection of a good mother, and that your relationship is always going to be thriving, that your career will be blossoming, that your home will be tidy, and that you will know exactly what you're doing all of the time, right? Like it's a unicorn, but yet so many of us will still live within the construct of that, because everywhere we turn, we see other women performing that. Attempting to perform it, or we see it reflected to us in advertising, in culture, in consumables. And so agitating for our own sovereignty from that means we get to make more conscious choices about what it is we do, and be more willing to delegate what it is that we don't want to do.
Yeah. Oh, amen. I actually think we could not spend enough time talking about the perfect mother myth.
Yeah.
Sophie Brock certainly calls it that, but just being in that dynamic of what we're socialized and conditioned towards versus stepping outside of a patriarchal notion.
Exactly. And Dr. Sophie Brock's work is so powerful. She talks about it, she characterizes that as a fish tank. And she said, it's everybody else is in this fish tank, like your mother, your mother-in-law, you know, the mother's group. And that sometimes in your attempt to agitate for change, you will even be turned on by those other women, because even though they feel trapped by this, there's a level of safety. It's like better the devil you know than the one that you don't. Because, so even the one, you know, who's ramming the tank can also be seen as a threat. And so this is why constantly cultivating our own sovereign way of mothering is a change agent, and also it becomes powerful work to liberate our daughters from.
Oh, I just love that. Change agent, liberate our daughters.
Right? Because they're going to grow up. I mean, you can look at this even in terms of like it starts before birth, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
And we even think about, like, you and I will no doubt spend time considering our daughters and what kind of imprint they're going to get around the birth system. And we'll want so much to release them from that. But ultimately, they're going to be swimming in this sea of how they should do it. And, it's a powerful imprint, despite the ones we've given them.
Totally.
Bringing awareness as much as we can to those constructs helps us to reclaim agency.
100%. It gets to be fun.
Yes. And I love this reminder, because on the other side of the resentment or the overwhelm or the feelings of not getting needs met, fun, right, is lightness. But yet, as we get more polarized, as we get more rigid in our parenting as a result perhaps of our righteousness, it's harder and harder to access that fun.
It is, isn't it? And isn't it so funny that the thing that we get self-righteous about, we're all self-righteous in our top values. So the things that we're most empowered in, the lens through which we see the entire world and what's important and valuable, that's a value, right? And so we become so empowered in that and see the world one way. This is the right way to live, the best way to live. This is the only way to live. That we automatically become self-righteous in it. And yet that self-righteousness really has a destruction side to it.
Yeah. And there's a destruction of self ultimately that happens if we don't, reflect on it.
Yeah. And in relationships.
Yeah. And, we ultimately grow we grow through our polarizations. We kind of always attempt to kind of swing so far one way. And I think about this, on my journey of whole food eating or organic living, where once I got to the point of feeling like I couldn't eat the broccoli because it wasn't organic, feeling like it was better to not eat organic broccoli than eat any broccoli, you realize you've gone too far, right? Just eat the broccoli because you'll get something good from the broccoli, whether it's organic or not. But you become so polarized about a way of eating or being that you miss the middle. You miss, the wisdom of that middle ground or that path. And so this happens in parenting, this happens in relationships, this happens, pick your top value.
Yeah, right. Yeah. One of my friends who's a Dharma teacher, she reminds me all of the time, because it's so easy to get polarized in your own viewpoints, and you don't realize you're not playing in the middle. You think you're really somehow balanced, and it takes some other beautiful human to go. And she says it to me all the time. I feel like it's one of her greatest gifts to me, almost like a man. She's like, yeah, and there's the middle path, because the Dharma is so much about choose the middle path,
Yeah.
And I'm always like, yeah, oh, that's right. Yeah.
The funny thing is that life will likely bring you back to it anyway. You'll get brought back. Yes. Because, the body.
But how messy can that look if you're not governing that yourself? Yeah, that can look like blood sugars up and down and up and down. Yeah. And we can do that with fantasy nightmare.
Famine,
pain, pleasure. Oh man, I don't have the energy to sustain a life built on that level of emotional instability. Yeah. I'm not up for it. I'm not in for it. It's too emotionally consuming, and I have far better things to do with that energy.
Yeah. But you can see also too, particularly after the last 2 years, how many people's nervous systems are just perfectly attuned to that. Yeah, right? Have become addicted to adrenaline and cortisol and the next stimulant.
Yeah, and the spikes in fear. Yeah.
Sure. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Even though it doesn't feel good, there's something safe about it because it's crept in, it's become a new normal.
Yeah. Totally. Your last point was anger as a change agent. Wisdom is found when you release the self-righteousness and the shame.
So I believe for many women, mothering and motherhood is when you get to reclaim your anger and meet it in ways you didn't know it existed within you. For so many women, we are socialized out of embodied rage.
Yep.
And only through the mirror of our own children are we taken to the depth of it and therefore have a why big enough to confront it.
Yeah.
Because until then, we had all of the reasons to numb it, to not meet it, to explain it away, to shame it.
Yeah, to get away from it.
Yeah. So it is a change agent because anger is feedback. And it's also enormously galvanizing.
Yeah, it is.
And can become also a pattern that we use to initiate action from people around us or from ourselves. So getting clear about like what's my kind of, 411 on anger? Like how does it move within me? What typically sets it off? Yeah. And with what sets it off, is it my own unrealistic expectation on myself or someone else? Because often the perfect mother myth ties beautifully into anger. I can't meet this thing, so I'm going to be fucking furious because I'm so consumed by my inability to live up to this myth. So instead, my anger just railroads me. It leads me into this cycle of guilt with my children, or it keeps me in this trap of thinking everybody else has got it figured out instead of me. So if I do enough, then I can relieve myself of the guilt and I'll be okay until I set it off again and I'm guilty. So learning how we move with anger, learning how to be in our bodies with our anger and choose to harness it in a healthy way and express it in a healthy way so that it's not our children or partner's responsibility, I think is the invitation. Because we are raising a generation of children who now have parents who apologize to them. Look at that, right? Like, I don't remember my parents ever apologizing for threatening me with a wooden spoon or, dare I say, probably slapping me because it was too shameful or there was too much self-righteousness. Yeah. We're in a generation where we recognize our triggers, we recognize our responsibility, we recognize neuroscience, but we're still deeply human with an enormous imprint we're trying to grow through. So the power of being in our body through this edginess helps us heal it and harness it, and it also helps us raise children who stay in their bodies longer, because our culture still dissociates children from their bodies, who become adults who need addiction or in constant entertainment to be able to function.
Yeah. 100%. Just love it.
This podcast is brought to you by what's going on in our world. So with Bridget, you have Reimagining Motherhood. It's a monthly membership, and at the moment you can come in and get all things recalibrated with rage, repair, and resourcing yourself in motherhood. Find out more at bridgetwood.life.
And over at julietenner.love, you can grab a completely free downloadable guide called Set Sexy Up. It's a tricky one. Try saying that 10 times. Set Sexy Up, daily routines that change your relationship. And you can grab yours at julietenner.love/set it up.
What was your list?
Oh, my list. Well, in the end, actually, I only put down 2 points. And the reason I only put down, you actually already touched on one of them, was because I thought, okay, what I can contribute here is what I see the most of, which is, for me, relationship.
Yeah.
So when I think about resentment, what I automatically go to in my mind is the resentment that I see play out and become incredibly dysfunctional, and dare I say an anchoring point of dysfunction within relationship. So there's almost, I think, no emotion that's harder to be with because it can be so undercover and so hidden and yet so insidious in its destruction force before it's even realized. You know what I mean?
Give us an example of that, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, passive aggression is a clear marker of a resentment, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I actually wrote down the 2 ways that I see resentment in relationship play out. So let's take a relationship where one of us overcompensates. Now, I'm going to say typically that's the woman and the mother, only because you and I, Bridgie, both that's the demographic that we serve and see the most. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in other formats. This is just the format that we see the most. So this is the woman who takes on all of the household chores, all of the everything to do with parenting and food and bill paying, and she just keeps adding more and piling more on her list. And the more she piles on, the more she's constantly, like fantasy nightmare, comparing what she's doing to what she perceives her partner's doing, and they're clearly very deficient and doing nothing compared to her load, and there builds this resentment over and over and over. So she becomes a slave in her own mind. Right? Yeah. She's taken for granted. She's not seen. She's not valued. There's this reel that's going around at the moment that I've seen come up quite a bit in mothering pages. That's like some dude going, you just need to not do everything. And then these mothers come on and they're like, then who the fuck is going to do it? And I'm just like, a little bit heartbroken every time I see this reel, and it's gone a little bit viral because I'm seeing it quite a lot. So which says to me,
the fact that it's gone viral means that it's speaking a truth.
Right? So this concept of overcompensation from one partner where they take on more and more and do more and more instead of, and it's all very under the current, right? Like, so you could be, I'll say still pond metaphor, you look like you got your shit together. You look like a hard ass, functional, getting shit done, not a lot of energy, not a lot of flow, pretty hardened. You might flick off the passive aggressive. You might be like, oh, you're such an idiot. You never do anything. You might bitch about him to your friends, how incompetent, how you've got another child that you look after, like name the way that you do resentment.
Yeah.
But in the end, you take on more and more because you haven't had any other setup, conversation, framework that allows for another opportunity. Right? You would rather say nothing and not rock the boat and just keep piling more on like this donkey, more and more and more on its back, instead of getting on the same team and negotiating.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, what happens to the relationships that have that kind of dynamic once the kids leave? Because there must be so much buried resentment and likely lack of attraction.
Well, I think that's when we see a lot of divorces when children leave. It's a lot.
Yeah. Because all of a sudden the glue that held it together.
And these are the relationships where you hear predominantly the man goes, I felt sideswiped by that. I had no idea why we got divorced or why she was so unhappy. I had no idea. Yeah, because she's been a still pond, not discussing, not rocking the boat, not bringing anything up, just taking on more and more and more, and under the current, building intense resentment over and over and stacking it and stacking it and stacking it. And that repulsion and that disconnection and that dissatisfaction and the feeling unseen, unloved, unvalued just keeps getting bigger. But it's all under the surface.
And it's all under the surface because she hasn't felt a level of safety.
I think there's a number. I think that's a whole podcast on its own. I mean, I think that there's a whole lot of setups into how we end up at that dynamic. Yeah, and it can come in a lot of different forms. But when I was thinking about resentment, I was like, okay, yeah. So there's the resentment of you're the slave.
Yeah.
Man, I've lived that. Have you lived that, Bridget?
Yeah.
Yep. I've done that.
And I notice what it's like because it feels like a fire. Like it feels like a seed.
I've been getting hot as I'm like really thinking about that feeling. And I'm like, oh man, I remember that bubbling fury.
Yeah.
And you'd see them completely unaware and just sitting on a couch, and you'd be like, I want to tear you apart right now.
Yes.
But they're like, la, 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 how was your day?
Yes, it's so true. So true.
Yeah, so unaware, right? So get on the same team, right, and get on the same page. You got to be able to work towards the same North Star, the same goal. And if neither of you want to do it, then there's a myriad of other ways that can look like, where it's not just you're the workhorse. Yeah.
But what that will require is for you to potentially challenge your identity that says you need to be, you know, like your mother who just did everything. Your mother who had such a well-cultivated masculine and who didn't complain.
Yeah. And who actually has an equal partner, not another child.
Yeah. Because who, like, I mean, this is awful, but who wants to get intimate with who they perceive?
No one. That's the whole point. No one. Right? It is the biggest killer of desire and intimacy. But I will add to that the flip side of this exact dynamic. So likely, if you're the person who's doing this, then likely your partner will be building an equal amount of resentment for you, but in the opposite. I'm never good enough.
Yeah.
You only ever tell me all the shit I get wrong and how I get it wrong and how badly I get it wrong. You never appreciate me. You never see all of the shit that I do. You don't see all of the ways that I do contribute that are different to yours. So I'm only ever whipped like the slave by you.
Yeah.
You're only ever telling me what's not right. And I build up this resentment of I'm not good enough. And no one wants to be around someone who continuously whips them with you're not good enough, who nags them, who creates the parent-child dynamic. You're doing it yourself if you're nagging them. Pick up your socks. Wait a minute, have you done? And micromanaging the shit that they do. Man, you are putting yourself in the role of their mother. And they will get just as resentful as you are. Right? Decreases desire and intimacy, and ultimately erodes their self-worth. They don't want to show up because they never get it right. So why bother trying? They stop trying. They stop trying to meet you. They stop trying to fuck you. They stop trying to get it right because they always get it wrong. So they withdraw and hightail it out of there. They retreat from you. So in this scenario,
they might be physically there, like they might be in the bond of family, but they leave it in a myriad of different ways.
Yeah,
into scrolling, into sport, into work.
Yeah, whatever. So they will feel resentment over the fact that they are not appreciated. They're never good enough for you, for this, for your family, for your relationship, whatever it is. Never good enough. They'll resent you for that, the same degree that you're resenting them for not being good enough and not stepping up. And you will resent yourself for being a narky witch.
Yeah.
And you will resent them for putting you in the role of being the narky witch. And man, I've lived that. Have you lived that, Bridget?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like just
but it's so humbling though, because then you have to go, fuck, yeah, right. Okay. I remember when I used to have some like big arguments with my husband about this kind of thing years ago. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I would actually go and write down all the things he said because my identity was so resistant to accepting those things about myself. So I would actually write it down so I could come back and reflect on it.
Like as a third person, like a way of seeing it on paper rather. Yeah, so clever actually.
Because what happens is because your ego can't handle the feedback, you either don't fully hear it or you just ignore it and you continue the same cycle.
Yeah, totally.
Well, they just continue to either leave mentally and emotionally or get so pissed off that then it blows up again and you're having the same conversation 2 years later.
Yes. So just like at Halloween, for women, there's more options than sexy kitten and witch. Here in relationship, there's more options than slave or witch.
Yeah.
Because they're the two roles that we cast ourselves into and that we get cast into without opening up all of the stuff that Bridget just spoke about.
Mm. And to the slave thing, part of getting out of that will also require us to meet our inner child. Because if we're feeling like a slave, chances are we have not empowered our children enough. Because
our partner,
anyone, right? Like there should be an equal contribution relative to age for everybody in a home. Like, I don't exist simply to serve you.
Yes.
And if we're struggling with that as a concept, then that's also to look at, okay, well, why can I not just, call out of the people capable in this home, above a certain age to be able to contribute?
Yeah.
What's in the way of that?
Yeah. Yeah. But I would argue a child from 2 can contribute.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm just thinking more about like the baby. But even from 2, they can certainly pick up their things. They can certainly help.
They can have one job, put the spoons in this drawer, put these blocks into this basket, find all of the soft toys. Like there's plenty of ways that they can contribute and want to. Like by the time they get to 3, they're all about, I do it.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, that's also why, like in the Montessori, like practical life is the toddler's work, because they want it. They want to help, but it will require us to slow down enough to allow them to grow into that capacity.
Totally.
Which might be a nervous system working.
Yeah, 100%. So if it's not working for you right now, I can guarantee you it's actually not working for anyone. And you don't have to stay stuck where you are. You truly are the master of the life that you are creating, but it's in your everyday actions. It's not in these grand once a year vision boards. It's literally in how you show up, be, and do every day in its minutiae. So if you're unhappy, unsatisfied, building, stacking resentment that is like drinking poison, trust me, it is. You think it's easier right now to do that than to have whatever you think is harder, the conversation, the setup, the resistance, the argument from children or partner, whatever it is you think is worse than swallowing it and just keep on keeping on. I can tell you it's not. That poison just gets deeper and more entrenched and harder to heal from.
Yeah.
But you don't have to drink poison in order to live an ecstatic day-to-day life. That's not what it's supposed to be.
No.
Like we might have occasional shit days.
Yeah. But it shouldn't be a way of being.
No, it shouldn't be a way of being. And if it is, there's some things that are deeply out of alignment and integrity for you. And that feedback is trying to get you to navigate towards what is in greater alignment and authenticity to you. So please listen and please do it. Because it doesn't have to be that way.
And often the key is it's not so simple, but the key is ultimately to chunk it down so you're out of overwhelm. Because sometimes when you might be hearing this and going, fuck, I can't even see the wood for the trees right now because that's my dynamic.
Yeah. Also really normal for our own stuff, which is why you have to get coaching, join a container, be facilitated outside of your own bullshit that got you here.
Yeah.
Girlfriend, you have got yourself as far as you have got yourself. That is fantastic and brilliant. But unless you step outside of yourself, this is it.
It's funny. I had a client come on board just this last week and she said to me, I just can't deal with my own bullshit anymore. And sometimes we get to that point.
Haven't we all been there?
We just go, I just can't keep doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's getting me exactly here and I'm spinning my wheels.
And I'm sick of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful point to get to, because it's like you hit that point, you're like, I can't fucking take my own shit anymore. Screw it. Despite everyone else's, I can't take it from myself anymore. I'm at the point now where I've got to shift. Totally. That is where the power is.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
It is where the power is at. You're 100% right. So, Bridgie, how do we work with and connect with you, your places and spaces?
Yes, in the Reimagining Motherhood membership. So at the moment for May, we're looking at Recalibrate, Rage, what's it called? I've had a mental blank. it's all about rage, repair, and resourcing yourself in motherhood. So we are looking at all of the kind of tackling one topic at a time. So actually defining rage in motherhood, feeling where we're at on a scale of our rage, unpacking where it's coming from, and then moving into repair and then our resourcing. So really stepping you through that journey for the next month or so in the membership. And what about you, Jules?
Well, Lover School actually has just closed its doors, but what I do have available for you at the moment is a very quick, easy download that is called Set Sexy Up. And it's all about creating daily habits and routines that can really deeply and profoundly impact your relationship in its day-to-day life. So it's 8 steps and it's 16 pages of very thorough information. You can pick the one thing and it's completely free for you at the moment. And you can grab that at julietenner.love/set it up.
That sounds so good.
It's so good.
I'm going to get it.
You know, Brittany, what it's like? You and I are like content creators. It like, it's just like, you know, thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I want to do that. And then I get it out and I'm like, good, it's out there. And then someone goes, oh my God, it's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it is. You know, when you have that moment.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, I can see it on paper. Like I can see this way of like, yeah, but I can see it on paper and I can see how rich it is. So
exactly.
Good.
It's so good. And we are Nourishing the Mother. You can connect with us on nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram.
Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.